Welcome to the Plant Fit Summit, bringing you the best in plant-based health and fitness. This is Luke and Toby, and today we have Vikas Garg. Vikas is the founder and CEO of A Billion Veg, a rapidly growing global internet platform on a mission to help 1 billion people become plant-based by 2030. A Billion Veg has spread to 100 plus countries since its debut in 2018. Vikas launched A Billion Veg after a 15-year career as a Wall Street banker. We start the conversation with Vikas sharing about how his journey into a plant-based diet began. Enjoy the presentation.
I was really lucky. I was raised by Indian vegetarian parents. So from birth, I was raised vegetarian. And pretty much even in India, that basically meant we were very, very close to vegan because dairy wasn't really a very big thing in the Indian diet. I'm almost 40 years old. So looking back when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, milk was still fairly scarce. It was like a luxury item. And then when we came to America, that's kind of when we went all in on dairy. So growing up in New York City, basically I was, I at pizza, if you look at the food pyramid, the slice of pizza was my pyramid basically. And, I grew up eating a lot of cheese and a lot of dairy. And never really thought anything about it, just because in the US at the time in the 1980s and the 1990s, you had ads on television, showing people all these beautiful people, these celebrities and sports stars, and they had this little milk mustache, and it was known and accepted, it was the truth and the gospel that things like dairy were very, very, very good for you. And of course always got the question from meat eaters, why, where do you get your protein from? And just kind of shrugged, but still maintained being vegetarian. To this day I've never eaten meat, but it wasn't really fast forward into my late 20s, late 2000s, 2007, 2008, it was just a really challenging time for my family. My dad had heart problems. He ended up getting a triple bypass, and my mom developed breast cancer. And and at the same time we were going through this crazy global financial crisis, and it just that's really when I started to kind of look at our own habits, even our consumption of dairy, and really started to kind of at least make those links about dairy and cancer and heart disease and diabetes. And, my father was also diabetic. And that's when I started to think about veganism. So it's now been, fast forward, it's been 12 years. And I'm 100% committed to it. It's been a journey, just like everything else. It wasn't perfect in the beginning, definitely not perfect in the beginning. It felt very hard, even though I was vegetarian already. And then at some point it just clicked and became sort of one of the most inspiring, impactful things that I identify with, that's made me really feel like who I am, given me purpose in life.
You brought up the milk mustache thing, and in Singapore, I remember seeing American magazines with the milk mustache ad, and it also actually wanted to make me drink dairy as well. So it, in a way, inspired me as a little boy. So I want to kind of pick up on what you said about the challenges that you first moved into this lifestyle from vegetarian to vegan. So you would assume that vegetarian to vegan is just that next step. So what challenges did you experience when you first made the switch?
All my favorite foods back in, now today we've got substitutes for cream cheese and butter that are really great. And cheese, even cheese, there's a lot of different substitutes, but I'd say if you look back a decade ago, these things didn't really exist. And say what you will about substitutes, whether they're necessary or not necessary, but I think it's true that when you're transitioning, there's certain things you crave, or there's social circumstances when you go out with people And frankly, like sometimes you just want something delicious and juicy and tasty and, fat, like fatty and oily. And, that was just really, that was a challenge, is just, is finding things, or, like realizing that all bread, like where you shop for bread, all bread has eggs in it or milk in it. And, like most of the products that you like, you just can't have anymore. Things that you didn't really even think about as having dairy have dairy in them. And that was just really it. It was a big, it was just finding alternatives. I mean, still to this day, things like, dress shoes, like, I still have not found a beautiful men's dress shoe that like satisfies, the everything that I used to love about leather. But that's okay. I just don't wear them anymore. Now I'm like kind of, I run a startup, so I don't really need to wear fancy dress shoes anymore. It was just really that. It was, in the beginning, it was just finding things, going to a restaurant with your friends and not being able to eat anything, having to veganize everything, which meant taking out all the things that you used to enjoy. And then the restaurant kind of giving you something that always made you feel like you were, compromising or sacrificing.
When I first started 8, 9 years, and in the last 5 or even 3 years, there's so much change and so many options. Even now, there's a pork option, Omni Pork, as we know. It's incredible. So I want to go back to what you said about making the connection between dairy and your parents having issues with health. So when did you actually make the connection between the dairy that you were consuming and their health issues?
2010, I started reading about it. And I mean, for me, it was like, why are my parents getting sick? My mom, been doing yoga for 30, 40 years. Both of them are vegetarian. Neither of them smoked. They didn't even drink. Today, now they drink wine. My dad's doctor recommends it. My dad likes the occasional beer now, but like back then, they didn't even drink at all. And so, I started to think about, well, my dad's diabetic too, and he's got cholesterol. Why does he have cholesterol? The reality is, Indians, in our diet, and especially the diabetics in India, which we have a lot of diabetics in India, associate everything, all of their health problems with sugar. And I started to, and I just assumed it was sugar. Diabetes is about sugar. But, when you actually sit down and understand what diabetes is all about, right? Whether whether you've got type 1 or type 2, whether it's about insulin resistance or insulin production, right? It's, at the end of the day, it all comes back down to what you eat. And it's not really just sugar, right? It's about fat, and it's about cholesterol. And, with heart disease, the plaque and everything, the blockages in the arteries, that all has to do with the fat and the cholesterol. So I started to, when I started to look at this, and breast cancer was a bit more, cancer was a bit different. But today I'm happy to say that I think there is a lot of evidence in the United States that's linking bovine leukemia, which is a form of leukemia that apparently 30-40% of dairy cows apparently have in America, and the linkage between bovine leukemia and female breast cancer. And it's great that doctors are uncovering this. Back then, that didn't really exist. But I think I just felt like my otherwise very, very healthy parents were getting sick, and there had to be a link between food. And what was astonishing to see is, today my dad doesn't have diabetes, and he's 12 years older. Doctors gave him, basically, they said that with this kind of very invasive, very, very traumatic heart procedure, and it's a triple bypass, it's likely you have 10 years, right, after this. In 10 years, you will either need another procedure, and that will be even more painful, or you will, like 10 years. And today my mom and dad are vegan. And these things, my mom lost hearing in one ear because of cancer treatment, because of chemotherapy and radiation, whole bunch of ailments and everything. And I think that today, both of them being vegan, has just opened up a whole new life for them. My father, like, he doesn't register in terms of diabetes. He doesn't test positive for diabetes. Totally in control of his health. His doctors are blown away by how healthy he is. And it's just by living this kind of lifestyle, by paying attention to food, and they do not compromise at all on food. Like, the food is just beautiful and delicious. But it percolates into everything else. And it's really amazing to see that, I think that we all feel like, oh, people as they get older are resistant to change. But I think that the reality is that, that it's once you discover that this is a better way to live, and it's like, it makes you feel so great. I think that that's really infectious.
Congratulations on the health that your parents have, and to have them around must be so special. And thanks to your inspiration and thanks to your journey, now they're you guys are happy family and grandparents as well. So that's absolutely incredible. So I want to go into, sometimes people that have been vegetarian for years, decades, and people who are on this whole plant-based fence. So I can't really commit. I'm not 100% sure it's going to be a sacrifice. Do you remember the time when, was it an overnight switch for you? For me, it was an overnight switch, and I actually remember that specific moment. How about what was your experience like?
In the early days, it was let's try this, and there was a lot of stumbling. There were a lot of late night slices of pizza involved. And I think for me, so I had seen snippets of a film called Earthlings in like 2008, 2009. But it was when I finally sat down and I watched the whole thing, and it's like, I don't know, I think it's about an hour and a half long. It took me like 4 or 5 hours to watch it. I just had to stop a bunch of times. But when I finally sat down and I watched it, I remember at the time writing to one of my friends and saying, that's it, I'm just done. Like, and that was it. That was the day. So that film, I'm very thankful to the people who were involved in that film, because I think that I think for a lot of people, a lot of us who are vegan thank that film for really being a catalyst for a switch for us.
For me, it was the ethics that brought me into this lifestyle. But after watching Earthlings, and then now also being now aware of the environmental impact of animal agriculture, and I know we were involved in the film Let Us Be Heroes Together. I'm actually going to be getting Rebecca will be on this summit as well, which is going to be incredible.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, and you actually shared some very, very interesting stats on animal agriculture. Maybe you could just share with us what you know.
I would say that there's a couple of things, right? There's a couple of facts, which is that we have 7.5 to 8 billion people on our planet. And it's expected that over the next 10, 20 years that our population will grow about 10 to 20%, right? Depending on the time period, but 1 to 2 billion people that will be kind of entering humanity. And the whole world is obsessed about food and where are these people going to live and what are these people going to eat, and we need to grow more food. And the reality is, I think that we have more than enough food, and we don't. The environmental damage associated with food and food production is massive. I'll talk about those stats in a second, but I want to just reflect on kind of where we are today, because obviously, like, we're having this call over a Zoom call instead of probably doing it face to face in your studio. And why is that happening, right? And it's not happening because of anything that has just happened recently. It's happening because of things that have been happening for 600 or 700 years. COVID-19 is just a drop in the bucket, right? More recently, we had bird flu and we had swine flu. We've had HIV beginning in the 1980s and 1990s, Ebola. Before that, we had bubonic plague. And all of these things, they found their way to us, to people, because we encroached on wildlife, or we farmed animals for food, right? And I think if you look at, like, in the last 50 years in particular, meat production has spiked, right? It's commonly accepted that about 100 billion land-based animals are killed every year, or consumed every year by people, right? And the crazy thing is that the meat production, it happens mostly around the world in these concentrated facilities, and that's where these viruses incubate, right? And that's sort of the beginning of how they spread into us. So this is obviously really bad for people, right? And it's obviously really also very bad for the environment. And it's also really inequitable in a world where we have a population that's going to grow by nearly 1 billion in the next 10 years. So we don't need more food, but we need more equitable utilization of the food that we already have, that's already being grown. And I think when we I often talk about food waste in cities, and we know that the concentration of the population in cities is just going to continue, and that food waste in cities is 30-40% in the average city, right? And there's lots and lots of amazing companies that are doing things from trying to prolong the shelf life of fruits and vegetables, to, recycling food waste, to composting food waste. It's an amazing number of companies that are doing things in that space. But I want to just talk about, even before food gets to our cities, if you just think about how much land goes to feed all of those animals that are then being consumed by, like, if you look at the amount of protein that's produced by livestock for human consumption versus the amount of protein that's available through plants, it's crazy. It's like 1/3 of agricultural land globally is used for growing livestock feed. And 1/3 of US corn production, 1/3 of all of US corn production and 40% of grain worldwide is fed to livestock. 75% of the world's soybean production is fed to livestock. That's a lot of tofu, right? Like 3/4 of the world's soybean is fed to livestock. And ironically, it's like the cultivation of all of this feed and cattle, the two things combined, the cultivation of all of these things, are the single largest cause of deforestation, right? And when we talk about the 1 billion hungry people, the 1 billion people around the world today that will probably miss 2 out of 3 meals, or all of their meals today, they don't have food on the table. Just that 1/3 of US corn production that's fed to livestock, if you took that corn production, you'd have more than enough food to feed all of those 1 billion people. So, the solutions, like, yes, we need technology. We need companies around the world that are going to build solutions to this. But I feel that what we're doing is, it's like we are constantly plugging and patching up and disguising something that fundamentally is weak, that we have built our systems, our food systems, on a very weak foundation and principles and decisions that were made in the 1950s, where nobody predicted how big things would get and how crazy things would get. And I think we really need to revisit this. And I think that ultimately, unfortunately, you look at the politics of everything today, right? With the rise of extreme nationalism around the world, and kind of everybody fending for themselves, and the lack of leadership in many places. I don't think that it's going to be policy officials and these sort of these non-governmental groups that then try to work with government and all of this, that are really going to be the driving force of change, and they're going to change fast enough. I think the reality is us people, we need to take this back. We need to take this responsibility upon ourselves, and we need to we really need to just, we need to help, we need to look inside of ourselves and really understand, like, hey, how do my daily choices, how do the choices that I'm making every day contribute to all of this?
Just when you said 100 billion land animals, that's astronomical, the amount of resources that take to produce the feed and also fatten up these animals and then to be slaughtered. And I think back on the time where I worked in the hospitality industry, and at the end of every night, trays and trays of steaks and sausages that weren't finished were just thrown into the bin. And I always think that, is that all an animal's life is worth, to spend their whole lifetime in misery and then to just get thrown in the dumpster? It's just crazy. So where 100 billion animals are concerned, what about fish? What's the impact of fish? Because I mean, if we look around cafes and drink places, they're starting to say, all right, well, we're not using straws anymore. We want to save the fish. What's your take on fish?
Honestly, Luke, I think you know how I feel. Whenever my wife and I, we travel around Southeast Asia, and if we're running in the morning along the ocean, or the beach or something, and we see these like kids run out, or it's beautiful little kids run out, and then they like scour the beach, and they're picking up like little plastic bags and plastic straws and things like that if they can find them. And then you see those same kids like eating a fish fillet at lunchtime, right? And I'm not one for for shocking little kids or disturbing families or anything on their vacations. And that's not the kind of activism that I'm interested in. But it just makes me ponder the question, right? Do they it's very penny wise, pound foolish. If you took all of the straws in the entire world right now, like everything in every restaurant, and you just said, let's throw them all in a giant bag and dump them in the ocean, that would account for like 0.02% of all of the plastic in the sea. Like 0.02% is nothing. And 70%, nearly 70% of ocean plastic comes from the fishing industry. Comes from our demand, the demand that we place on the ocean and on fish for food. So that's insane, right? If you look at the great, I think they call it the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, right? It's the size of Texas or Alaska, and it's floating about a couple of 100 miles off the coast of California, and it's basically between California and Hawaii. And it's this massive patch of crap that all accumulates in this one place for I don't know for what reason. It all ends up there. But it's all plastic, right? And it's all stuff that's involved in the fishing trade. And the thing with, I think the folks at Sea Shepherd do a really good job of kind of explaining it, and they have better stats than I, but from what they've told me, from what I understand from them, fish, we have a funny way of talking about food, right? Like we don't say cows or dead baby cows. We call them veal and calf and beef, right? And we call certain parts of pigs ham or pork or bacon, and we have a real disassociation with the source of our food. So even with fish, nobody measures the number of fish that are pulled from the sea. It's all done in tonnage, right? And that's how fish is sold, in tonnage. But the estimates based on the global amount of tonnage of fish that's pulled out at sea every year is it's approximately 2.5 trillion fish, right? So I don't know. I think that's like a number that we just cannot comprehend how big that is. But I think that there is, like everything in life, there's a balance, and I think that we are shocking that equilibrium, and we will pay for it longer term. I think there's a really interesting article in the Financial Times about a year ago that I read, and it was on the cover. It was on the cover of the Financial Times, talking about global fertility rates and how increasingly semen quality, like men's semen quality, is over the last 40, 50 years has just plummeted, right? And it's becoming harder and harder for couples, young, healthy couples, to have children. And you're seeing the advent of all of these different things to address that. But they talked about microplastics, right? And they talked about a lot of things. They talked about detergents. They talked about how scientists are investigating many different things. But they said that scientists are investigating the linkages between plastic and fish and our human consumption of fish. So, I think it's not for nothing. There's consequences, and there's unintended consequences, and things that we haven't even thought of that we will discover over the next few years.
And then to compound that with erectile dysfunction, which now has been to be linked with a diet high in animal fat, saturated fat. So it's just like a double whammy to a certain degree. So I want to kind of shift gears now. And you mentioned earlier about voting with the dollar. Every single vote counts, and it's really up to us to make that choice and create that shift. So instead of voting with the dollar, voting with the phone, which is really what you've done with A Billion Veg. So before we actually get into what A Billion Veg is, how did a Wall Street banker move to a mission-driven app like A Billion Veg?
I talked a little bit about my background, and I grew up in New York City, and my brother and I were always kind of nerdy and good with numbers, and I really started interning and working on Wall Street as a teenager. So in my early teenage years, and so it just stuck. And after college, it just went right into it, and never really looked back. And I think that for a lot of people who work in like high stress environments, and work in things like industries like banking, where you're working a lot of hours, some people their outlet is going out all night and partying. I'm probably guilty of that a little bit and a lot sometimes, but at the same time, my other outlet was always kind of impact and impact in my community. So I used to tutor kids in math. I used to help ex-convicts, like people coming out of the prison system in New York, get their first job, and try to get back on their feet. And I used to always volunteer and support animal sanctuaries and support like minority education, which, growing up in New York, I was very fortunate to have parents who, we didn't have money, but we had love and we had a lot of support inside our house. And my father was extraordinarily gifted in math. And so, he would teach us math in the summers. And so we had an extremely supportive home. And growing up in New York, I saw how disadvantaged others were relative to us, and so I always really believed in giving back to the community. And as I got into my 30s, I just started to feel like, okay, cool. Everything that I wanted when I was really young, like as a teenager, this idea of going on Wall Street and making a career and becoming successful and having a fancy title and all of that stuff, like I kind of felt like, okay, cool. I had kind of got there, and now I'm like, am I really going to do this for the rest of my life? Because I had a mentor. I had like this 70-year-old mentor back in New York, and he was just like, Vikas, you're like at a point in your life where you have to decide, because you're either going to do this and you're going to now start your own business in this space and do that for the next 30 or 40 years, or you're going to go and try to do something else. And so, but you better decide pretty quickly. And I said, you know what, like, well, I made this decision when I was like 14, 15 years old that this is what I wanted to do. And that was, I look at how stupid and young and naive I was at that time. And I made made the biggest decision of my life at that time for my career. And I let that set the tone for 20 years. And I just was like, you know what? I keep coming back to how when I go out with my friends, I never talk about my work. I always talk about all these other things, the stuff that's built around my values and my virtues, right? That's what I'm really proud of. Like, you asked me what I'm proud of. I don't talk about my career so much, right? And I said, you know what? I've got to find a way to build a business that allows me to do all of those things, basically full time. Like, basically allows me to create impact and make money, build the business that allows me to do a lot of good in the world. And, you know, and I hated the whole idea of social media platforms back then, because, you know, like, you see all the privacy issues and the data issues and the stealing of consumer data and marketing it, and the US elections in 2016, and, you know, the role that platforms like Facebook and others played in that. And I just felt like there's got to be, if social media is an extraordinarily amazing force, but if it can be leveraged and used the right way to create positive impact instead of all of this. And I said, why don't we just rip up this playbook and try to create a platform built around inclusion and built around a common set of values, and really, you know, and start with that principle, and then also build something that's creating impact from day one, even when we're not making money, even as a small startup. And we're now a 3-year-old startup, making a little bit of money, but frankly, we are donating and giving away a lot more money than we are making, every month. And it's really just all built around this idea that, hey, like, let's work on inspiring businesses to see things in a new way. Let's work on inspiring people, and let's ultimately show people that every choice that they make as a consumer has an impact, can create lasting impact to the life that's beyond theirs.
I love it.
And when I started thinking along those lines, I just fell in love with it. You know, I just was like, yeah, if I fail doing this, it will have been a really worthwhile effort. So I have nothing to lose, you know? And, you know, again, life is long. So, like, let's do this and let's try to make it a real success. And, you know, and we're going to learn a lot. It's going to be a lot of fun. And, you know, and it's been a great experience. Like, there hasn't been a day in the last 3 years that I've really regretted it. You learn a lot when you're you know this, right? But you learn a lot when you're kind of doing it yourself. You learn how powerful a team is. You learn, you know, you learn a lot of really interesting things. You just learn how hard it is in the beginning.
And to hear your story and visiting the office on how you started in a small little corner that was so tiny to 2 big offices, which are big, with a big team, and with the app being used all over the world. It's incredible, Vikas. So congratulations.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah. So for those that haven't yet downloaded the app, maybe you could give us like the elevator pitch on what the app does and how it can benefit really everyone, including the animals.
Yeah, so it's really simple. The app is called A Billion Veg, and we're an app that helps people around the world discover vegan food, find information about where they can find the best vegan options. We started with this idea that, hey, restaurant reviews are like a thing of the past. People want to see what's on their plate. And often, because most restaurants around the world might have one vegetarian option or vegan option, if you're lucky, right? Let's actually forget about restaurant reviews and all of that, and let's focus on the actual experience that you would have at any kind of restaurant, even a steakhouse, if you wanted to order something vegan. And then let's get businesses, let's use that consumer data to actually make the experience better for you. So, every single review that's posted on our platform by our community then gets sent back to the business owners. We serve consumer advocacy by delivering them information about what people are saying about their food, what people are saying about their competitors. So if you're a Japanese restaurant in Tokyo, we're sending you information on what the best rated vegan dishes are at Japanese restaurants in Tokyo and around the world. And it's all about getting businesses to compete. So from that sense, we take a really fun consumer experience, which is like sharing photos of your food, and then using it really for consumer advocacy and working with these businesses. And at the same time, we also, besides the food part, we realized about a year ago that a lot of people liked using our platform to review products, like, like the plant-based products that you might buy at the grocery store, whether it's a banana or whether it's, some organic kale, or it's plant-based burgers or things like that. And even an extension of that, which is things like cruelty-free cosmetics, cruelty-free fashion. We talked about the shoes. We have people reviewing vegan shoes and recycled shoes and materials and things like that on our platform. And it's all about helping people, just making it easier, making the information easier, making it from an honest source, which is people like you and me, and really building a platform that ultimately it's a user-generated content platform. So in the last 2 years since we launched the app, we've gotten posts, like consumer review posts, in 122 countries. And we're at about 250,000 reviews. And that's, if you look at restaurants, we have vegan dishes. We have like almost 100,000 vegan dishes reviewed at about 30,000 restaurants around the world. We have nearly 50,000 consumer products reviewed at about from 20,000 brands around the world. And that's it. It's really about helping people just connect with this lifestyle. And whether it's you're looking for your first vegan meal, or you're looking for a vegan meal 3 times a day, or you're looking for information about plant-based cheese, which one's the best, which one's going to melt really well, we want to be that platform that helps you find that. In addition to that, we help people socialize. So, a big part of our roadmap for this year is continuing to build kind of the community. And really, we started with a very community-first approach from the very beginning. So, beginning with people kind of commenting and conversing with each other. Soon, you'll see more and more kind of communities and recommendations within the platform. And we just kind of continue to build on that. So really excited about what we're doing. We're building a community for change. And one of the unique sort of points about our platform, and this is where I chose a different path. Most people will create something and then they need to market it in order to sell it, in order to get people to sign up. There's a marketing strategy involved. Some people get influencers involved. Some people spend money on marketing on Facebook. And what our thoughts there were, instead of marketing on all of these platforms, what if we created impact every day? So what if we donated money to some of the most impactful organizations in the world? So we have about 50 or 60 partners, ranging from farm animal sanctuaries to wildlife rescue, to organizations like Sea Shepherd, who are doing amazing things in the seas, to large advocacy groups like Mercy for Animals, to organizations that are focused on educating children in schools across the U.S. and Canada, and organizations in Europe that are focused on diet change. And we understand that we support mostly all vegan organizations, but recently we have also started to work with organizations that are focused on just helping people be more vegan, in the sense that go more plant-based. Think about going from the 80-20 approach, where 80% of your plate is animal derived sources of food, to 80% of your plate being fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and whole grains. And so, what we do is very simple. If you go out to eat, or you open up your fridge, and there's your plant-based yogurt or plant-based milk, or you've made a Beyond Burger, at home, or you're going out to eat, go to a restaurant and order something vegan, take a photo of it, share it. Then that becomes sort of geolocated and everything. It helps somebody else then find that thing and experience it. And when you do that, we put $1 in your pocket every single time. We put $1 in your pocket. And that dollar basically goes to your choice of one of our 50 partners. So whatever you're spending, think of it as you're getting $1 out of that to donate to really, really impactful work that's helping the environment, that's helping animals, that's helping people, that's helping children. And this year we have $1 million to donate. So our goal is to donate $1 million US, or about 1.4 million Singapore dollars, to these impactful organizations around the world. I'm really fortunate to have investors who believe in us enough to say that this is something that they really want to stand behind.
Congratulations, $1.4 million. And to know that it's all you really need to do is just take your phone and take a picture, which everyone does anyway. I mean, at this day and age, the camera eats before we do. So I think that's incredible that you set up a platform like that brings community together, that brings options, and also, that has a social impact. Proud of what you've achieved as a friend and as a business as well, to see you guys grow in leaps and bounds. So based on all the stats that you've received, of course, we know like the plant-based movement in places like US, in Australia, and UK are a little bit more mature, and there's a lot of growth there. Where do we see, what kind of changes do we see being based in Asia?
I think definitely in the cities. I think that, even in China, I was talking to a reporter yesterday in China, who was saying that, all of the influencers and the celebrities, the actors and actresses, they're all talking about eating healthier. They're all talking about eating more plants. And that's ultimately, where you need that at the top. You need sort of that influence to kind of come down. And so it's really great to see, even in places like China. And it's ironic because like China does have the world's second largest population of vegetarians, but they also have everybody else who eats a lot of meat. I think that the Asian diet historically was pretty much very, very plant-based, in terms of the components of the plate. And I think that as we saw the abundance of meat, we saw that diet shift, right? And I think that people here are increasingly becoming aware of the environment, of sustainability, and of just generally their own health. And it's thanks to films, it's thanks to a lot of the films that are coming out. It's thanks to a lot of globalization occurring, where people are just becoming much more savvy of trends faster. I remember when I used to go to India as a teenager, go back, and I always felt like everything was kind of like 10 years behind. It doesn't feel like that anymore, really. It feels like, it feels on par often, and potentially, at least socially, considering what's happening in the US right now, maybe more advanced, right? So I think that Singapore has a big role to play in the region, and I think that as Hong Kong's future becomes increasingly uncertain, I think you're going to see Singapore play a massive role in pushing in a lot of different things, but especially around sustainability. And I'm really grateful to see organizations like the Singaporean sovereign wealth funds, like the Temasics of the world and the GICs of the world, increasingly get involved in sustainability initiatives, including investing in a lot of the companies, in several of the companies in this space.
Being in Singapore is an exciting space to be in. You can see there's a huge push for plant-based meat alternatives and to be self-sufficient, because the majority of our food comes from externally. So I think the government's investing in a lot of startups in this space. So it's really, really exciting times to be in this region.
Agreed.
So as a little bit of a wrap-up question and more a takeaway, we've talked about, your inspiring journey into this lifestyle and creating A Billion Veg, being an activist in your early days as well. What is the one thing that a person can do today to take control of their lives and their impact in the world?
I'd say if we open up this question to broader, we've been talking about veganism. We've been talking about, going plant-based and vegan pretty much the entire hour. So I think if we just open it up and go broader than that, forget about that for a second. Whatever purpose you find in your life, whatever from a value perspective or from a virtue perspective you find that makes you really happy in life, find ways to just amplify that. Because, all I can say is what I wished I knew 10 years before I got started on this was just how motivating it is to live a life with purpose, and just how motivating it is to connect purpose with business. And I think it's a blueprint for the future. And if I could plug a book that I suggest everyone read, there's an amazing man named John Wood in Hong Kong. John is a founder of an organization, of a nonprofit called Room to Read, which he has a very inspiring story. I won't get into it. You read the book. His first book is called Why I Left Microsoft to Change the World. He, let's say he just changed the world. He's responsible for educating and teaching literacy to 20 million school children in emerging markets around the world in the last 20 years. His last book is called Purpose Incorporated, which is really interesting because all it does is it talks about companies, both good companies and bad companies, and how they either integrated purpose into their mission and into their company, into sort of the DNA of the experience for employees and for customers, or they kind of went the other way and either didn't or purposely didn't, and the results. And I think it's a really wonderful book and very, very inspiring. And really, I think I read it 3 years ago, just when I was starting this, and it spoke to me. So, I'd say that my one advice would be just try to find your purpose, try to live your life with purpose, and you'll be much, much happier.
And I think it starts with being fully conscious of what you eat, which is what started this whole journey for the both of us. So with that in mind, thank you very much, Vikas.
Thanks, Luke. It's been a real pleasure. It's always great to see you.
We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. A wise man once said, "You make a new life by making new choices." Now, if you know that what you eat matters, if you know that health comes from healthy living, then the time to make new choices is now. And just imagine owning the summit for life. Click the button for more. Maybe you know our stories. Luke and I lost family to cancer, and we wish we would have known sooner what you are learning here today. So please, share the summit, take action, and let's support each other. Thank you. This is Toby and Luke signing off, and we can't wait to see you for the next presentation.